the giraffe. Let's move on. Geology. Another big word. It's the study of the structure of the earth. How does the earth show purpose and design? We've shown the animal kingdom and plant kingdom. Let's talk about the earth. The first thing about the earth is rotation. If my microphone was the sun and my earth was the right hand, the thumb would be the day portion, the little finger would be in the dark portion. As that rotates, then we have day and night. We rotate, I know you know this, every 24 hours. Supposing we rotated slower, like once every 50 hours instead of once every 24 hours, then our days would be 25 hours long, our nights would be 24 hours long. We would burn up in the daytime, we would freeze to death at nighttime. Who designed it to rotate at the right speed? Was that by evolution? How about the tilt? The earth tilted like this, 23.5 degrees. If the tilt is like my arm and the microphone was like my sun, then the top portion of my arm would be in what season? It's further away from the sun. It's in the winter. But when it's summertime, I can't even do this. I'm stretching exercise. It's closer. It is the tilt that produces our seasons. Also, the revolution around the sun, where we revolve around the sun once every 365.25 days, that produces our year. If we were traveling faster, we would be further away, and it would be so cold that we wouldn't be able to bear it. On the other hand, if the speed of the earth was slower, we would be closer to the sun and we'd burn up. Was that accident or design? Well, I'm asking the same question, you're giving the same answer, and I'm sure it's true. And the air and water is very, very important. If it wasn't for the air and the water and the abundance of it, and by the way, our plant is the only planet that has the air and the water and the vegetation that's necessary for life. How did that come about? The Bible says this: God formed the earth to be inhabited. It's like a builder. If he's building a house, he'll build a kitchen, he'll build bathrooms, he'll build bedrooms, he'll build closets, because he expects the house to be inhabited. And God, in 6 days, formed the earth to be inhabited. It's a prepared place for the image of God to dwell in. And I think of it when I talk about it, I'm so glad. Before Jesus left, he said, I go away and prepare a place for you. And when you think of what he did in 6 days, think of what he's built for us in eternity. Aren't you glad you have that kind of hope? Air is extremely important. Without air, there could be no life. I am told, I've never tried it, that you could go about 30 days without food. I probably ought to try it, but I probably need to try it, but I haven't. And I wouldn't encourage you to do it if you never fasted before. So you go approximately a month without food. Again, I haven't tried it, but there was a supernatural fast like Elijah and Jesus and so forth. But again, you could go approximately a week without water. But how long can you go without air? Well, I don't want to prove this scientifically. I don't want you to hold your breath and find out. I don't want anybody to pass out on us. But probably just a few minutes. It's extremely important. And then the composition of the air is just perfect for life. Air being approximately 1/5 oxygen and 4/5 nitrogen, and some traces of other gases, probably less than 1%. What if the composition was different? What if it was 25% oxygen? You know what would happen? Well, I don't know whether any of you have taken chemistry or not, but I used to teach chemistry. But if I took some steel wool and I heat it in a Bunsen burner and then I plunge it into oxygen, it'll burn up. And the earth would burn up if it was 25% oxygen rather than 20%. Who created the right composition for the air? And then the fact that air expands when it heats, and then it rises, and fresh air comes in below, which is the wind and so forth. So important for the surface temperature of the earth. And then the dust, which you ladies probably think is a nuisance because you have to dust regularly. If it wasn't for the dust, the rain and the snow couldn't coalesce on it. Now let's talk about water. Plants and animals need water to live. Plants use water to produce the food that man eats. Water makes the soil by erosion and expansion, and water provides the temperature control. That's the reason why a place like Norway isn't completely frozen solid, is because the water around it is providing some temperature control. Now, water has some very unusual properties. I think I mentioned about 8 of them in my book. I'm just going to mention a couple of them. These properties are a real blessing to us. Unusual properties. For example, to melt a gram of water at its melting point is called the latent heat of fusion. Water has a very high latent heat of fusion compared to other chemicals. Some 80 calories per gram. Why is that important to us? If it wasn't for that high heat of fusion, the first warm day, all the snow on the mountains would melt, and you'd have tremendous floods, and then no water in the streams and the rivers the rest of the year. The oceans don't freeze over either because of it. Now, water also has a very interesting property, and that is that it expands when it freezes. You put something like wax and melt it and put it in your freezer, you'll see that when it freezes, it shrinks. But water has the property that it expands. It shrinks and shrinks until it gets about 4 degrees centigrade, and then it starts expanding. And so ice is less dense than water, and it comes to the surface. Why is that important? Well, it causes the ice to float and the lakes to freeze over at the top rather than the bottom. This prevents the rest of the lake from freezing. If it wasn't for that, all the fish in Minnesota and Wisconsin would have died already by now. I'm glad God created the earth with abundance of water and all these unusual properties that make the survival of life possible. It was not by accident. It was designed. Let's talk about gravity for just a minute. We all know and observe gravity, but I've yet to hear anybody explain what causes gravity. It's extremely important to us because if it wasn't for gravity, the water would all fly off the earth. In fact, even we are traveling right now at least 1,000 miles an hour. Do you realize that? You're going about 1,000 miles an hour. If the earth has a circumference of 24,000 miles, and we're rotating once every 24 hours, we're traveling about 1,000 miles an hour. Why don't we fly off into space? It's gravity that God designed. And this is what keeps the atmosphere from escaping into the space. If it wasn't for gravity, the earth would just take off into space, and who knows where we would be. God created gravity.